let's have a look at what kind of interest rates one can expect based on the past. In 2010s, the last decade, we've seen the lowest interest rates in 800 years. These are real interest rates adjusted for inflation, which is the right thing to do. But that's amazing. So if you look at real interest rates, just look at that. They're really they're negative right now.
Short-term interest
there was
rates, yes.
one little, short-term interest rate. There was one little equivalent in 1965, but at the moment, nothing like in the 800 years.
Yeah, so money to those who can sort of access it is extremely cheap and widely available. And that's also one reason why financial assets around the world have done so well, especially stocks, including in places like India, which is that even if the fundamentals haven't looked that great, people with such low interest rates feel compelled to sort of invest in assets such as stocks because they don't get much in the
bank,
right? In terms of, because if you adjust for inflation, the return out of the bank accounts basically is close to zero, so or negative in many countries. So that's what's sort of leading to financial assets doing so well, and also I think to the fact that we have this period where money is so easily available to those who can access it.
Right, and that translates into inflation. And if you have a look at inflation globally, look at inflation in India and how it has changed over 10 years. Low inflation in India, globally it has been, and in India, but how it has changed is important. India's inflation is still high compared to global levels. Just have a look at this. 10 years ago, India was 161 out of 190 countries in terms of inflation. Really bad inflation. And now it's still at 145. I mean, there are 145 countries, 144 countries ahead of us with lower inflation than India. So that is a not even halfway mark.
Yeah, but I think that this tells you 2 points. One, that inflation across the world has collapsed. Because India's inflation rate, when its ranking was 160, was 9 to 10%.
Right.
Now India's inflation rate is closer to 5%, the headline inflation rate. And yet our ranking hasn't improved that much.
Yeah.
Because globally inflation has completely collapsed.
Right.
So this is what this tells you now.
But
in terms
it
of
also tells you that even though you've gone down to 5%, don't be all thrilled about it, because globally it's even better.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, okay. Let's move on to what's going to happen in the 2020s. This is what Ruchir, based on analysis of the past, inflation may come back. Now, to what extent we'll discuss in a minute, but here are the signs. Number one, global unemployment rate at very low right now, pushing for higher wages. Next, if you look at productivity growth, as you mentioned, people are gaming. What do you expect? Anyway, productivity is low growth for various reasons. And the global government debt, which is something you've been stressing a lot over the last decade, in fact, is at its all-time high of 90% of GDP. This is just government, not all total debt in a country.
That's right.
90% of GDP, unprecedented.
Yeah. The only time when governments, including the United States, have had such high debt levels or run such large budget deficits in normal peace times is, or rather, never in peace times. It's basically been when they've had a war or something. But this is possibly the most controversial forecast, I would say, of all the 10 that we're going to discuss today, because there is no evidence of inflation in the world today.
Yeah, that's when you make forecasts, not after it's over.
Yeah, so there's no evidence of it, and a lot of people will be sort of saying that so many economists have been calling for higher inflation back on the back of low interest rates, and it just hasn't transpired. So why should it happen now is going to be the skeptical calling for that. And my feeling is the fact that because now you have such a resources constraint which is building up, that you could finally begin to see some inflation break out. And when that does happen, it'll be a huge event, because people are so used to inflation rates only falling. So this is a very important and yet possibly the most controversial of the 10 forecasts.
Well, for us it's not controversial. Anybody says, why do you think inflation is going up, it's not going up? We'll just say, Ruchir says so. Simple as that. 8th out of the 10 points. Number 8 of the top trends of the 2020s. Inflation may stage a comeback, and that affects behavior a lot and what you should think of doing and where you should invest, etc.
Yeah, because gold, for example, could be the big winner in that sort of environment.
Scenario.
Yeah.